Hey everyone, it's me, HawkeyeG, and we're here with another faction introduction video. This time I will be covering the Knights of Caledor faction for the High Elves, starring Imric as the legendary lord. I would say that Imric's campaign is definitely one of the more difficult ones. He is a free DLC lord, so he doesn't really come with any special units or buildings, but he does have his own set of mechanics. He's a High Elf lord who specializes in dragons, cavalry, and a little bit in nobles. And as I look at this faction, it will be from the perspective of the Mortal Empires map, but we're not going to focus on that too much. So with that being said, let's get in and take a look at some of the things here he has to offer. We're going to cover what the faction-specific bonuses are, what the legendary lord is like, and what his kind of attributes and skills, like his pros and cons are, and we're also going to talk about any unique mechanics that the faction might have. So let's get in and take a look. Alright, so here we are in a campaign. This is pretty early in the campaign. I'm much further than this on the active save. But this is just where I thought it would be appropriate without, overwhelming with too much information to just kind of get started and take a look at some of the different things. So to start, we're going to cover the faction bonuses. Now, one of the things you might have seen in that intro menu is that Imric does have mountain as suitable climate. He also has desert, which I don't think it was listed there. But these two are unusual for the High Elves. I think it's much more prevalent on the Vortex campaign because where you start is like 50% desert in that region, and there are some mountains nearby. The mountain bonus is much more prevalent on the Mortal Empires campaign, and so maybe that's why it showed it in that little intro map. But yeah, I mean, you can see where we start. It's like you literally start with mountains in your own province. It would be kind of rough if that was yellow for you. And then of course down here we have a bunch of desert territory as well. So that's kind of one of the small things to note about his faction, just a little bit of a difference. We also have the dragon taming mechanic. That's the unique faction mechanic for the Knights of Caledor. I will be touching on that later, so we're not going to cover it here. You can also see he actually has two separate rights that are different from the base rates, and so we'll talk about that as well. And then of course, recruitment duration -1 turn for Dragon and Dragon Prince units. Like I said, Imric's faction, and him specifically as a lord, focuses a lot on dragon units and cavalry, and there's nothing about nobles in here, but we'll kind of see that in both the rights and in Imric's unique skills. So what do the rights do? We'll take a look here. Now you have the Invocation of Asuryan and Invocation of Isha. Those are standard for the High Elves. I'm not going to worry about those. The Greater Invocation of Vol is one of the ones that's different, okay? Normally, it would give you bonuses to, like, all of these high-level melee infantry listed here. I know White Lines of Trace, whatever, but it would also give you recruitment cost reduction and recruit rank increase if you had taken the base version, right? Not this upgraded version, just so you can understand the differences. You can see here we've lost that cost reduction and recruit rank bonus for these cavalry, but we do keep the armor bonus. I don't know that 5 is a lot, especially once you get to the stage you have these kinds of units. You're going to be fighting enemies with armor piercing, but whatever. So then you still have this same ability, the Vol's Hammer. This is in the regular and this upgraded version. You cast it on an enemy unit, and it will either destroy a nearby enemy siege tower or a wall unit that the enemy unit is standing on. It can be a little finicky if you cast it on the wrong unit; it doesn't quite work. But so this doesn't really change. So obviously then the two big changes here. Well, actually, the one other thing is you get a powerful magical item. It gives you a crafted level magic item, which those can be on par with your unique items. Sometimes they're good, and some of them are just crappy, but it gives you for a selection of 4, so you'll probably get something good from it. So sometimes it's worth just casting this when you have the chance, just to get that item. Beyond that, though, you can see the big differences here are gives you +3 uses for all Dragon Breath attacks in all of your armies, and enables flaming attacks for all your armies. So what that means is it adds flaming damage, or it enables flame damage for your standard attacks for pretty much every unit that you have. And then it also gives you 3 additional uses for your Dragon Breath. So these are the two big differences here, right? You lose a couple of bonus, you lose the recruit cost and rank bonus for these high-level melee units, and instead you get this flaming attacks bonus and the Dragon Breath attacks for all armies. Okay, so that's what the Greater Invocation of Vol does. Now, the Invocation of Eldrazor, this replaces the Invocation of Hoeth. The Invocation of Hoeth focuses a lot more on magic related things and like bonus experience and ability, like not abilities, but like spell related things for casters, right? For casters and lore masters of Hoeth. Well, like I said, this faction is focused a little bit more on nobles, and so you can see that reflected here, right? This replaces that other right, so this one gives you experience per turn for lords and nobles, experience gain increase for, you know, whatever kind of, if we're talking hero actions or we're talking like post-battle experience for lords and nobles. It also gives them an increase to armor-piercing weapon damage for lords and like heroes. Well, this is for all embedded heroes, right? And for dragon princes, and then also this melee attack bonus for the same set of units. Right. The only real downside to this is this minus 15 diplomatic relations with high elves. Maybe a little bit more significant in the Vortex campaign, but certainly in this campaign, the high elves are over here, right? So it's not really a primary concern of yours. So it can be really nice, and it's pretty powerful. The thing is, it depends on how many embedded heroes you have, how many lords you have. It is and it isn't effective. Like, this is great, but it's so limited in scope, right? And that's one of the problems. It does include dragon princes, though, and that's one of the interesting things that we're going to kind of talk about here. But so that covers all of the faction bonuses that you get here for this faction. The next thing I want to talk about is Imric himself. What makes him special? What things does he do as a legendary lord? You know, what's the like positives and negatives? He's a pretty powerful melee lord. Technically, he's classified as a shock cavalry, as you can see here, but that's because he actually starts the game with this elven steed. He starts the game with a unique mount. That's right, I didn't buy this. I'm not going to put 2 skill points into separate mounts. You start the game with this one. How nice is that? His specialties are really about, like, he buffs his army, and he has some good abilities and bonuses for himself. So that's really what he's best at, right? He's top-notch for empowering his own army and bringing his own strength to the battlefield. I mean, he has a unique dragon, isn't that nice? And he's got a bunch of skills that we'll look at here in a bit. But the downside, of course, is he doesn't really have a lot of campaign or faction-related bonuses, right? I mean, we'll look at this in a second, but like you can see here, Lord's Army, this is all provinces, Lord's Army, Lord's Army, Lord's Army, right? Like, most of his unique things don't do anything for any other armies or any of your settlements, or really, like, you have the research rate bonus and you have the noble capacity increase and unlocking recruitment of nobles from all provinces. That's about it, right? He doesn't really have anything to boost like your other armies at all. And again, you know, our faction bonuses here, we don't have anything like campaign movement range or recruitment cost reduction. We have the recruitment duration reduction, but otherwise we have to rely on our rights in order to get bonuses for like other armies besides Imric in this campaign. So just something to keep in mind, but it is he's still really good. It's a pretty good trade-off, and especially because, I mean, his Mortal Empires campaign, your victory goals are a bit easier. Because I'm not gonna try to look through them right now, but your victory goals are easier. You're much more isolated. Like, it's really nice to just have a nice Imric Doom stack, a really strong army with him, instead of trying to, you know, micromanage a bunch of armies, take a bunch of territory. You will eventually, sure, but just to start out, right, it's good. It's nice to have. It gives him the advantages that he needs in the early game. Okay, so if we're going to look at his special attributes, so like I said, he does start with this mount, and I kind of wanted to start on this details page because there's some interesting things here. Because the other interesting thing is the Star Lance. He starts the game with this as well. This isn't, you can see, right, it doesn't exist in his skill tree. There's no quest battle for this. There's no quest line for this. You start the game with a unique weapon for Imric. So he starts mounted with a lance. This gives your army this little bit of a charge bonus. It gives him a bonus versus large and speed, and this ability, which gives him fire damage and causes weakness to fire damage on attack, plus increases his charge abilities and his armor-piercing weapon damage. Very nice. It is the Star Lance ability you see down there is an activated ability, but you can see it has unlimited uses, so it can be really nice. The last thing we'll look at on this page is this Dragonkin bonus. Now, again, keep in mind, these are just bonuses for him, right? So, campaign movement range increase, that's really nice. Upkeep reduction for dragons and dragon princes, which, again, really lends itself to the specialization. Like I said, I say his faction, it is kind of his faction, but it's almost more him as an army and a leader are focused on dragons and dragon princes for himself, right? If you are not really focusing on those things with other armies, that's not really going to be a terrible thing for you. Might be worth it if you are targeting your research properly to kind of focus on dragons and dragon princes. But again, he's the only one who gets this upkeep reduction. He's the only one who gets this campaign movement range increase. And he's the only one who gets this immune to mountain and desert attrition, right? That kind of sucks. Like, in order to take over some of this territory in this campaign, right, the mountains here, or the deserts here, or the deserts in the Vortex campaign, he's the only one who gets that immunity bonus. So his army will be extremely useful for whatever you need it to do in his campaigns. His other armies are going to be kind of lackluster. But I guess we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about Imric. He's really good. These are some of the things he's good at. We're going to move into the skills page now and take a look at that. One of the first simplest things to look at here is on the red line, you'll see his very starting ability is different, right? It replaces the standard leadership boost with this ability, Dragonhorn. He gets 3 uses of this per game, or per battle, I mean. It affects everyone, all allies map-wide, gives them plus 24 melee attack. This is pretty big. That's a big amount of melee attack and can cause fear. Honestly, you almost don't want the fear because you don't want the enemies to run away while you have this massive damage bonus. Well, not damage bonus, but ultimately damage bonus, right? Accuracy leads to damage. But yeah, this is really great. And it allows you, right, it feeds into his like melee focus, right? If I'm going with cavalry, even if I'm not spamming dragon princes in the early game, other cavalry are going to be viable. And we'll see that reflected in some of his other skills up here. You can see that I still haven't really gone that route myself necessarily, but we're still in the early phases of the game, and it is the High Elves after all. But regardless of that, even when your spearmen get into melee combat, like melee attack is the attribute that they're missing, right? So you could even go with Imric and maybe push a little bit more into melee infantry instead of doing the ranged heavy playstyle that the High Elves tend to favor. But regardless, this is a very strong ability. Very nice. The next thing that I want to look at, here in the middle of the yellow line, you can see his abilities here a little, like this is like a this one changes from lord to lord sometimes, but this one is specific to Imric and is different, right? Lord of Dragons, a debuff to a single enemy unit of minus 24 melee defense and minus 40 melee attack. That's really good. This is another, it's so strong. Definitely consider getting it. Again, Imric is like a pretty solid duelist. He is a little bit more of like, even when you put him on the dragon, I'd almost say like shock cavalry is a better application of his skills than like melee duelist, right? But this kind of ability will help you a lot, regardless of what kind of combat you're getting. Well, it's a great ability. Whether Imric's even fighting that person or not, great ability to have, great option to have. The next thing I want to touch on is his other unique item here, the Armor of Caledor. You can see the bonuses there. Ward save 10%, that's pretty good. Vigor loss reduction is good as well. The armor's nice, but maybe not necessary. And then the character aura leadership effect. So that actually kind of makes up for this skill replacing the original, right? You still get that leadership effect. It also has a pretty significant ability, the Armor of Caledor. You can see you get 3 uses of this per battle as well. It has a very long a much longer cooldown than his other abilities, but it restores up to 1,000 hit points. So you can get 3,000 total HP regen over the course of a battle with this. It also restores his vigor 100%, so he can go from being like tired to being fresh, and it how do I say this? It says right there, ability recharge reduction. It refreshes all his abilities so he could activate them again, right? The one downside to this that you see here, cannot move. He literally can't move. You use this and he's stuck in place. So you kind of want to plan this out, right? It's not really a defensive ability. You don't want to use this as like a panic option because, okay, great, he restores 1,000 hit points, but he takes 990 damage from all the archers that are shooting at him and the spears that are stabbing him because he can't move, right? You almost want to use it as a more offensive ability. You dive into like an enemy like group of infantry, and then you pop this when his health is in an okay place, but not at maximum, right? And then once that ability recharge is set, then you can pop Dragonhorn again. You can pop Lord of Dragons again. You can even pop perhaps his Dragon Pact or his Star Lance, and we'll look at the Dragon Pact in just a second here. But yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind. It is a very strong ability, but you want to be careful not to like trap yourself with it, right? The fact that you can't move once you use it, like he'll still attack stuff if he's in battle, but you can't get him to move anywhere. So it's just something that is an easy little piece to miss, especially in the heat of combat. Try to keep that in mind. And like, so I keep touching on this. There's really not too much to show here. I guess I don't have it unlocked here yet, so maybe I could load up a different save. But he has a unique dragon mount. It's a dragon. He flies on a dragon, shoots dragon breath. Obviously has good synergy with everything else that he has, right? Just know that this exists, right? He also has a couple other unique skills. So you can see he can only get this dedicated to Vol. But, you know, it kind of makes sense maybe if there was something for dragons, but this is fine. He also has this Blazing Lance effect, which gives him, you can see, like, the charge bonus is nice, but the big thing is it gives all his attacks the flammable effect. So any attack he does reduces enemy fire resistance. Then he has this Dragon Pact, which this is essentially the bombardment spell from the fire magic tree. I am blanking on the name of that. Piercing Bolts of Burning, right? It's essentially this, but it doesn't cost him any mana, right? It's an ability that has 4 uses, 120-second cooldown. So you can see, like, there's Imric as a lord, and this faction particularly, it's definitely a bit more micro-intensive, right? This isn't like Tyrion where you can just spam archers and spearmen, or like Avalorn as well, where like the early game is about macro expansion and just using basic armies to sweep the map. Early on as Imric, and even into the later stages, performing well in combat with Imric and his army is a lot about like synergy, right? And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here with some of these things, but since I brought it up, I'm going to touch on it, right? So he has this ability that causes, map-wide melee attack increase in fear, ability to significantly reduce the stats of an enemy lord. He's got this armor which will heal him up and refresh all of his abilities. So you might start a battle by diving in, popping this, and then you can, or like in the middle of a battle, right? You can pop this. He has literally a fire bombardment spell that he can use, and he can use it after hitting an enemy to cause fire resistance reduction, and then popping his armor so he can't move and gets surrounded, and then casting a fire spell on himself, right? Now, this is compounded by some of the unique skills he had here, so this is why I said I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm just going to go straight to these since I'm talking about it, right? Dragonheart here, which increases fire resistance for all units in his army, and then Ashen Fields, which gives a map-wide 20% weakness to fire damage to all enemies. So you can see this stuff really stacks up, right? If you can get, like, again, Imric, you got to be careful not to overextend him or use him too much as a melee duelist, but he makes incredible bait. He's such good bait. You send him out, even if his Star Lance is on cooldown, you hit them and they still become weak to fire damage. Plus, they're already weak to fire damage because of this. Plus, Imric and everybody else in the army already has fire resistance. Then you pop your like health regen. It resets your abilities, so you can even pop the Star Lance, which you probably wouldn't want to do at that point. You want to save it until the next charge in. But you can throw down a couple of abilities. You can make him a duelist lord just by having this ability off cooldown, and then you throw down a fire spell on yourself. On top of that, he starts the game with this Fire Mage. So it's just ideal synergy, right? You can overcast that Burning Head, and you probably still should try to avoid hitting your own units. But if you do, past a certain point, it's really not that big of a deal because your entire army has this increased fire resistance and their entire army has this increased weakness to fire damage. So you can be a bit more reckless with your usage of fire magic because of how much more impactful it will be for you in every fight, right? So that was a lot of words to say, but that, like I said, there's a lot of synergy to think about here, right? He even starts with a Dragon Prince unit and a Sun Dragon unit. Now, I'm not sure about this one. I might actually just try to look it up real quick on the side. I don't think, let's see, Dragon units, fire type, damage. I don't think that breath attacks are technically count as fire damage, especially because of the variety of them. Yeah, and of course nobody has an answer to it, but at the very least, the Sun Dragon does fire damage on its melee attack, right? Oh no, okay, yeah, Sun Dragon's breath causes fire damage, duh. Okay, don't be stupid, Hawkeye. Just look at these things and you have the answer in game for you. Thank you. Does this do fire damage? Yeah, okay, idiot. I take back everything I said. Forget the last 30 seconds of this video, if you would. I could just edit it out, but I'm going to leave it in here for the sake of content. Dragon breath attacks do fire damage. Again, another great synergy with Imric, right? You have the weakness to fire damage for all your enemies map wide. You have dragons with fire breath attacks. You have a mage with fire damage attacks, and all of your units can get a 35% increased resistance to fire damage. So yeah, it's about using those kinds of synergies to be effective in his campaign. Now, I've rambled about that for quite a bit, but there's still a couple skills to touch on, right? This initial skill tree or skill for the unique tree, 2 influence per turn, kind of nice, okay, but unlocks hero recruitment for nobles, all provinces, and gives you a 3 capacity for nobles. And this is nice because Imric is one of those campaigns that starts out like somewhat isolated and with a 7 slot instead of a 9 slot capital, right? So depending on what kind of things you're going for, whether you're looking for like completing your research or getting to a certain unit, are you going to have room to fit in noble recruitment? Maybe, maybe not, right? But now I don't even have to think about that, right? It still would be nice to get eventually, but I don't have to worry about that for a decent period of time. And I can still, that 3 noble capacity, that means that I could have 1 in Imric's army. I could even get like 1 for assassinations and get 1 for stealing influence, right? So while it might be hard to generate influence early on as this faction, that is your workaround, right? You get this skill, and now you can start generating real influence for yourself, even if the territory you're holding isn't great, okay? So that's what can be good about that skill. Vol's armament, this one's pretty standard. Armor and magic resistance for all units in your army. Research rate increase. We already looked at Dragonheart, but it does give other bonuses besides the fire resistance. Not super significant, but leadership will help if you accidentally damage your own units. Melee attack bonus for Imric, kind of nice. It's good. It's good for only costing 1 skill point, right? Now this is what I've been talking about with cavalry and dragon units, right? Is these last 2 units. So you can see he gets this bonus for speed and charge bonus for his own cavalry units, as well as recruit rank. And now this is general for cavalry units. So I talked about this before, but that does mean that you might be willing to recruit some cavalry units earlier on in the game. Depending on how things line up, it might be worth it for you to get some cavalry units. You'll be going up against, well, in Mortal Empires you go up against Skaven and Greenskins, so it's not a bad idea to get like some early game cavalry, because those Illyrian, even Illyrian Reavers will be, is that what I'm thinking of? Yeah, not the Silver Helms, right? But even the Illyrian Reavers will be like versus like Skaven slaves and stuff like that. Might be worth having them. And then the last one is this, right? Vigor loss reduction for Dragon Prince and Dragon units. Physical resistance for Dragon Prince and Dragon units. Melee defense for Dragon Prince and Dragon units. These are kind of nice. It's interesting in a way. It kind of shores up for like the weaknesses of these units. Does it do enough to shore up for that? I don't know, but this is still great value. And like I said, so this is where, like, this is a big bonus for your dragons, right? And it does give you the bonus for your dragon prince units as well, so you can kind of specialize into cavalry even into the late game, or maybe not specialize. But if you even in sieges, if you have an army of mostly dragons and cavalry, sure, the cavalry isn't going to do the work, but that's what the dragons are for. You have a field battle and you have a bunch of strong cavalry, you're going to have a field day, right? So that's the last skill we're missing here. I kind of glanced at this once before, but it's pretty simple. Causes fire damage weakness to all enemies map wide, and it gives Imric a little bit of weapon strength. So that is all of the unique skills that Imric has here. But like I said, the biggest thing to consider here is the synergy, right? And there's a few different play styles here. You could go standard but lean a little bit more into cavalry than normal, right? You could go standard but lean more into dragons than normal. You could go totally into dragons and cavalry if you wanted to, and you could make it work somehow in the end game. Probably could or could not make it work depending on difficulty, but I could see like a 6 cavalry 10 dragon army, or maybe like 8 and 8, being able to do sieges and being able to do field battles because you have separate tools for each type, right? And they'd be, I don't know that the cavalry would be great in siege battles, that's why you wouldn't want to bring as many, but you could see, well, something to consider and maybe try it out for yourself. Not necessarily my style in the first place, which is why you might not see me do it regardless, but just something to think about, right? And like I said, he's got synergy with the fire damage for the dragons, with the mages, all that good stuff. So these are the kind of considerations you want to take into mind when you're playing as Imric, making effective use of them even in the early game when all you have is like 1 fire mage and 1 dragon. Like, having these powerful units is going to be the key to your victories in the early game. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about here are Imric's faction unique mechanics. And while this isn't really a unique mechanic, I think that this is kind of a good bridge from what we were just talking about into the next section, which is his starting province, and specifically the Darkhold, where he has this building. You can see this has upkeep reduction for dragons and dragon princes for all armies, but it also allows recruitment of dragon princes at tier 3. Now, these are still going to be expensive, right? Even with Imric's bonus, you only have a 25% upkeep reduction for them, so they're pretty expensive. But if we're looking at something like a Silver Helm, right, these are more expensive in Imric's army than dragon princes, because of that upkeep reduction from the Darkhold, from this building combined with his thing, right? That's a total of 40% upkeep reduction. So it's pretty viable to pull in a handful of dragon princes for your army early in the game. And like I said, at least in this campaign, fighting against the greenskins and the Skaven early on. But even in the Vortex map, I mean, you're going to be fighting the Skaven, you're going to be fighting Lizardmen, you're going to be fighting the Tomb Kings. Depending on the stage of the game, they're going to be more or less effective. But you could definitely use the cavalry on each of those opponents to a pretty decent effect. Maybe some high level, well, do they have anti-large? No, they don't. So maybe the Lizardmen wouldn't be the best bet for your Dragon Princes, but cavalry against Skaven, always nice to have. And Tomb Kings, like, having speed is just nice to have, right? So that's one thing about this campaign that's unique. This is specific to this campaign. He has a totally separate, unique building in his Vortex campaign. But this Mortal Empires one is a doozy anyways. But the other specific thing, and really the thing I should be talking about here, is the unique mechanic of dragon encounters. Okay, so I don't have one active right now. I might have to see if I can dig up a save that has one active. But so every 20 turns, you'll meet like a unique dragon, right? It'll be like a little quest pop up on the field. It'll pretty much always pop up very close to Imric or wherever you are at the time, right? And so what happens is you go there, you can decide to do nothing and just put it off until the next time, which will reset the event timer. You can pay them for influence, which is another good way of getting some starter influence early in the game to buy some like higher quality heroes and lords early on. Then the next step obviously is getting nobles and getting some influence stealing, but it's good to kind of combine them, or if you're short on influence, it's a good boost. Otherwise, you can buy the dragon's buff from them. So there'll be things like, increased damage or increased like armor piercing damage, campaign movement range. I honestly am not that familiar with each individual dragon's buffs. You can go and look them up for yourself if you're curious, and I'd kind of recommend doing that because the last option is to actually fight these dragons in battle. But when you fight the dragon, you're fighting a full army, right? It's a standard quest battle, and the different dragons all kind of represent different factions, or at least have different, they're almost like rogue armies where they have different like conglomerates of units in their armies, and so some of the fights are easier than others. And again, I don't know them well enough to tell you off the top of my head which ones are which. It's pretty easy to find that information on the internet, so I definitely recommend either looking that up or just throwing down a save before you jump onto that quest icon and find out what it is. But if you beat them in battle, you get all of these bonuses, and you would unlock them as a unique recruitment here. I believe it comes up in the Regiment of Renown. Obviously, I don't have any of them in this campaign because I don't feel confident going into those fights with spearmen and archers. I might be able to, but you probably get decimated in most of the fights, except for maybe one or two, right? But that's what that mechanic is, right? So you've got this 20-turn countdown timer. When they appear, they stay for either 5 or 10 turns, and then they disappear. Or if you just go straight to the event, you can make them disappear immediately and reset the event. And then, but yeah, so they give you that dragon. They give you a temporary bonus for like 10 or 20 turns, and the bonuses vary from dragon to dragon. They're kind of situational, and I usually end up putting off fighting them until late game, but that's just more my playstyle. Again, I recommend just saving and before you step onto the icon, and then try the fight just to see what kind of units they have, because some of the fights are definitely easier than others. The one other aspect to this campaign it's not like, I don't know if you would call it technically a unique mechanic, but he gets, I don't have this quest right now because I've already past that point. So you start the game, and shortly after you get a quest from Caledor, who you start the game, I believe, with non-aggression and military access, right? So you know of them at the start, and you start the game with these deals. You get a quest to loot, raise, or occupy a total of 6 settlements. Once you do, you get an opportunity to just outright confederate Caledor. Now, you can choose not to confederate them. You can confederate them with nothing, like without adding anything to the deal, and you'll take some standard confederation penalties, or you can spend influence to actually get a diplomatic relations increase with High Elves in addition to the confederation. Now, I think that this is like, should you do it or should you not do it? I think it's very situational. I think before you take your 6th city, you should consider saving and just seeing what it looks like, because you don't really know, right? And you can see in this campaign, it doesn't look too bad. I can't see diplomacy with Morathi right now. Oh, I wish I could, because in the last campaign that I played, I did accept the confederation with Caledor, and Morathi already had something like 10 settlements here on Ulthuan. Typically, either the Dark Elves, like Morathi, are going to be on here and immediately threatening your position at Caledor, so you're going to have to split your economy to defend a tiny little settlement over there. To do what? I don't know, like build diplomatic relations with the High Elves and perhaps eventually confederate them. But you're also going to have to defend yourself here and survive against the Greenskin onslaught. Now, again, in the Vortex campaign, it's a little different, right? You're going to be much closer to them, so it might be a more viable option. In that campaign, you're just going to be getting raided by the Vampire Coast instead. So maybe not as threatening, but you're still going to have to commit some like money and effort here. The other problem is, like, normally Tyrion, like either the Dark Elves are going to be huge here, or Tyrion is going to be huge here. And either way, you're really not going to be able to make much headway. So I would say maybe if you can do it pretty early in the game, if you can confederate them, or if perhaps you want to do kind of a migration thing. If you say, I don't like the starting territory on either campaign, I want to start on Ulthuan, I want to play a more traditional High Elf campaign, you can make the swap and do that. If you're feeling really confident, or if you're just doing really well over here in the East and you don't plan to expand, you want to just hold out, then you can like reshift your efforts to, trying to expand and build up over in the West. But yeah, in general, whether or not you want to actually take that deal is pretty situational. I kind of recommend against it, especially in the Mortal Empires campaign, but that's a decision that you should make for yourself, and you should try it here and there and just see what happens. But with that covers everything that we have for Imric's faction. We've talked about the unique aspects of the faction, like the bonuses they get, the rights that they have. We've talked a lot about Imric and what his special skills and abilities are, how to use him, and what makes him unique. And we've also talked about some of the unique mechanics that you will discover and find available to you in this campaign. So that does it for me here. If you liked the video, please leave a like. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to see more content like this. I would love to hear your feedback in the comments. Let me know what you liked about this video, what you didn't like. It looks like it's starting to get a little long here, and I know that people tend to like shorter content. There's a lot to talk about with this campaign though, so hopefully this is a little bit helpful to somebody. If you have any ideas on what other kinds of videos I should do, please leave those in the comment section as well, and I would love to get to them. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time.